By season 5, Glee was a shadow of its former self. With the loss of the original new directions in season 3, the lack of presence of Ryan Murphy in the back end of the show, and the tragic loss of Corey Monteith, whose character served as the heart, debatably he was a bit of an asshole. But definitely by the end of season 4, he was shaping up to become the central point of the show, replacing Matthew Morrison's Will Schuester. His death resulted in season 5 lacking a lot of the drive, spirit, and structure of the previous seasons, as it's clear that there's a serious restructuring that had to happen. A huge part of me often speculates what exactly was planned for this season. The biggest piece of evidence is the character Penny, the student nurse who gets with Sam, which is completely inappropriate, and perhaps making the assumption that she was cast before Corey Monteith's unfortunate passing is the reason why they kind of had to rework it in some sense. As I'm assuming they had to revise a lot, the show just sort of kind of chug along until we get to Sea of Angels, where they lose nationals. Then they have a reason to celebrate 100 episodes, and then the show completely shifts to New York. And let me just say this on season 5B. The pure New York era has some of Glee's best episodes. New York, Bash, Tested, Opening Night is one of Glee's best consecutive runs. But then after that, the show really destroys a lot of its hard work just to have Rachel back in McKinley for the final season. But when the show's not getting in its way, it's great, and it's perhaps what fans required or deserved from season 4 to begin with, instead of just purely focusing on Rachel and Kurt then Santana, because it worked so well. But it's really the first half of the season, from Love, Love, Love to Sea of Angels, which is considered the show's lowest point. Arguably, it's a ton of filler and just kind of throwing whatever to the wall. However, today I'm going to take up for these episodes and perhaps what is considered Glee's worst episode or its lowest moment, the end of Twerk. Derided for a crazy plot and Will Schuester going too far, this video essay is going to invite to think about how this episode, written by Michael Hitchcock, in a brilliant way affirms everything Glee is about, and how the response of the episode is very much part of the problem in which Will Schuester is trying to call out. Glee has a central politic that positions the new directions as underdogs, both due to their drive and talent, and also how their marginalized identities use music and pop culture to find liberation, joy, and specialness.
Mercedes is black. I'm gay. We make culture.
However, often the show, which is a cultural phenomenon due to the commercial interests of the show, but then also I think the blind spots in privilege which the principal writers of the show, Ryan Murphy, Brad Falchuk, and Ian Brenner, have, means watching Glee and being able to resonate with the core thesis of being part of something special doesn't make you special.
Something is special because you are a part of it.
Depends entirely on your lived experience. Because at times, the show's use of black comedy and satire, plus how the show operates as a commercial vehicle, means that it incidentally becomes a reflection of the very thing Glee is not about. I always preface this in my videos like this. This isn't an indictment on Glee, but just kind of a reflection on it as a product of the time. And one, I do think Rib have gone on and they have made strides in certain areas, for example, like Pose, and they've also continued some of the same errors, like the criticism that was leveled against Dharma. But I'd also like to emphasize that this video essay has been part of a series that I've been doing on my channel called Incidentally Intersectional, where I look at how TV writers unintentionally explore blackness, and even without a conscious effort, these narratives often mirror the complex realities of racialized experiences and being black in the West. My first one was on Striking Vipers, the Black Mirror episode, my second one was on Doctor Who, and my third one was on Glee. And I think like with Glee and Doctor Who, they're definitely two things that were very formative to why I think I love like pop culture and why I like talking about media and why it's a space I want to work in. And like I said, a paramount part of Glee is its whimsical presentation of social injustice, because it's its portrayal of casual racism and homophobia at times, which is part of the show's most astute commentary. Like Rachel saying this is Glee, not Crunk Club, is the exact type of shit I expect a character like her to be saying. But how do the dynamics of the show, both behind and on the screen, make lines like this or lines like
nothing scarier than a girl with a penis?
Or the overall treatment of POC characters in Glee slightly a bit more insidious than we like to think. Let's think intersectionally for a second. Ryan Murphy is a white queer man, and sometimes it feels like on Glee the core thesis of, you know, dreams come true, as the season finale is titled, only really applies to the white characters, namely being Rachel, Blaine, and Kurt. I mean, in the same vein, there are other characters who are white and get incredibly shortchanged by the show's writing. If you understand Glee and some of the subtext to how it's written, how the personal relationships, dynamics, and conflicts were informed by the actors and the dynamics on set, we can look at, for example, the treatment of Tina Cohen Chang and the microaggressions and the bullying, and it then just becomes slightly a bit weird, as nothing is being done to divert or actually change the status quo. And that's a narrative choice that is often offered to the white characters. Even when we look at how Ryan Murphy explores queer fantasy in his art, and I think Pose sort of makes up for this. A lot of Kurt's storyline is informed by the fact that he's able to live out things that, if you hear Ryan Murphy talk about the show, Kurt does have a bit of an idealized childhood. Obviously there is trauma there, but even the relationship he has with his dad is seen as a fantasy or an idealized version that can still exist within reality. And it works great for Kurt's character, as Kurt is allowed to be this ultimate possibility model. Possibility models is a term coined by Laverne Cox in reference to how trans individuals act as more than role models, is they are literally showing people that you don't have to do this particular thing, but you have the option to exist in any shape or form that you please, because the way has kind of been paid for you. Kurt acts as a possibility model. However, someone like Tina or Mercedes don't really work in the same way. Because of that, the show's ethic becomes slightly compromised. And Will Schuester is the biggest example of this, as he's meant to be this grounding force and moral compass, and he's just a little... And it's kind of the beauty of the show's writing, because all the characters, especially the main cast, who I'd say is Rachel, Finn, Will, Blaine, Kurt, all the characters on the show are truly awful people. But then there's also the sad reality that, like, the reason these lot are so insufferable is because of their whiteness and the privilege that they get from it. And the show does sort of try to challenge that or poke at that idea, but it genuinely makes characters, particularly Rachel and Finn, insufferable. But that's why I say how you interact with Glee and how you're inspired by it. Even though I'm someone who was deeply inspired by Glee and transformed by Glee, the level it can impact you and resonate with you is directly tied to your identity. And for me, in terms of actual representation, there are only very few characters I could really look to. Obviously, I could take bits from all the characters. As I've really been talking in these series of videos, is being able to see yourself, because this is important. Often I feel like Western media tries to peddle this idea of colorblindness, and I know seeing myself is important, but for me it was really the characters of Matt Rutherford, Mercedes Jones, and Jake Puckerman, who I'll save for the episode analysis, as he's completely character assassinated in this episode. But on Matt, I mean, he had 2 lines. I have nothing to say. Nothing. Now on Mercedes. Mercedes was the most talented person in that fucking Glee club. Let's be real. And it's a consistent part of watching her character journey, is watching her being undervalued and undercut continuously. For example, season 1, she kills Anna, I'm telling you. Then after the Glee club set list is leaked, she suddenly doesn't have any songs. And I understand, obviously, like, it needed to be Rachel. But the undercutting seems to feel systematic, and the power of what that moment is, which I think resonates much more with the audience than Don't Rain on My Parade, is undercut. It comes up again, season 2 and Night of Neglect. There's a plot point that seems to be addressing Mercedes' mistreatment and how she never really gets to be the true star she is. And I don't think that can be separated from the fact that she is a black woman. And I think the episode sort of understands that. But then there's a moment which is such a frustrating watch. It's when they're in Mercedes' car and Rachel's talking to her, and she's literally like, I just don't understand why, like, you get to be the star and I don't. Then it's just kind of like, oh, I don't know, well, like, ooh. And then it comes up again in Funeral when they're all auditioning for solos for nationals, and truly I do think Lea Michelle's My Man won. However, there's this whole point of how Mercedes is lazy, and it's a point that doesn't feel really right for the character, especially coming out of Jesse St. James's mouth.
Say it again, lazy, B-O-N-E-S.
And this is why one of my favorite, probably my favorite Glee episode is Saturday Night Glee-ver, which doesn't really seem to pinpoint in how the being in the new directions has probably reinforced Mercedes' lack of ambition and low self-esteem. Does seem to be trying to paint some level of awareness. But then again, the laziness is reinforced in her season 3 arc, where this point of Mercedes being lazy and not working hard enough is driven, and it goes back to the way the show really uses Mr. Shoot in a really wildly inconsistent way, because again, especially in the world of Glee, characters are allowed to have moral failings, but this just feels like, why are you just being so mean and weird? Like, you're legit bullying a student. And I mean, in all honesty, who hasn't, particularly if you're black, who hasn't been bullied and singled out by a professional educator? But then she's basically bullied out the club, makes a Glee club where she proves Mr. Shu wrong, she's the star, and then after, and this is one of my hot takes, and then after the Glee club give a fantastic Rachel-less Sectionals performance, and they basically use Michael Jackson as a bit of a cheat code, which I think, again, the Troubletones loons, and then they have to go back to the environment where the same prejudices and favoritism continue to exist. And then even post-graduation, Mercedes as a character actually gets some very good material to work with. A lot of it is her having to face systemic issues, which I'm sure Amber Riley could resonate with, whereas we're forced into the perspective of Rachel, where we see her navigate life with very little struggle, to the point where it has to be manufactured in a way that completely betrays her character. And then Mercedes is used as the black best friend to culminate in her winning a Tony. Whereas Mercedes' ending to me was lazy. Lazy. Oh, she's the opening act for Beyonce. It feels just like, yeah, okay, big black pop star, Mercedes, boom. And that's why I guess all the characters get to say their dreams come true, but only few are written in a way that makes it feel like you can watch this and be like, yeah, this is a possibility to me. So then, in talking about how the end of Twerk gets the core politic of Glee down correct, let's contextualize it with the backdrop of its conception and reception. And a lot of the things that make season 4 and 5 weaker seasons are directly tied together. It all starts with season 4. Season 4 is the first season since season 1 that doesn't follow the sectionals, regionals, national structure. And I think it does cause the season to kind of drag towards the end and end on some weaker stakes. But again, it's clear that it's shaping up for Finn to take over the Glee Club at the end. But due to Corey Monteith going into rehab after filming episode 19, it means he was written out of the season. For me, I've got very personal connections with season 4, 5, and kind of 6. As for me, that was the height of my Glee fixation. I used to go on the Glee wiki. I used to check the episode pages. They used to have episode pages up when the episode was even being filmed. So every day there would be updates, there would be plot leaks. Oh, they're doing this song, they filmed this number today. It was really a time to be alive. And I mean, before every Glee episode, I would know the A, B, C plot. I would know all the things that were going to happen. I would know all the numbers. I was just upset. And that's why for me, I could never hate season 4. You can never make me hate season 4. Because it's really able to progress the show forward with great character and world building, where the show finally starts to feel ensemble. And let's even look where we get to at the end of season 4. You have the graduates graduating, you have Jake, who's positioned to be the new star of the Glee Club. Harley's also emerged in her own way as a new Rachel, but she's very much the antithesis to Rachel. She has the same level of ambition, but she wants to channel it in a slightly different way, which I think was perfect. We have Kitty warming up to the Glee Club, and then we have Ryder and Unique who go through that catfish storyline, which set up a really good relational conflict, which resulted in Ryder leaving the Glee Club at the end of season 4. And then season 5 just kind of abandons all of that work. So then when we get into season 5, and obviously they've extended the school year out, or whatever setup they've done for season 4, it's just completely abandoned. And obviously we understand why. But then both season 4 and 5 suffer because it's build up, no payoff. And there's zero stakes throughout season 5 at all. And I do think it would have been quite hard for the cast, but I wished Finn's death kind of was able to linger a little bit more and just add a little bit more gravitas to the show. Because then even when we get to the Sea of Angels and Finn comes back up again, it feels off. And the loss and the weight of the loss feels off. But despite that, I'm going to argue that season 5A is really Glee at its bare bones. And because of that, it's able to get a lot more right than Glee at its very, very height. Because me personally, even though the height of the show is arguably season 2, I don't think season 2 is a good season. Like, from a written perspective, yes, Glee was a cultural phenomenon. Yes, it was doing amazing, and they had all these big, big moments. I've watched Glee maybe 9, 10 times. Season 2 is just all over the place, and I feel like the characters are doing things, and it's just, you get to the end of season 2 and it's just like, woo. And that's personally why I think season 3 had to be so stuffed with plot, because season 2 was just the show operating as a commercial product. So on that, in defense of season 5, R&D engagement, which I think was a terrible idea, Sam and Penny storyline and some of the canon issues with Ryder just suddenly being back with his big old head in the Glee Club. Love, Love, Love is a great season opener. Katie Orogaga's kind of lame. Moving Out is a great episode, and it includes a lot of the emotional gravitas that would kind of set up the later part of the season. I mean, Puppet Master's kind of dog shit, but it's also kind of because Jacob Artist, you will always be famous. In this episode, Jacob Artist gives the best performance that Glee Club has ever seen. No one has topped this. The choreo, the vocals, yeah. 8. And Previously on Ed Christmas is the show's best Christmas episode. That is camp, it's funny. I watched that Christmas episode because it truly is the best. And onto the main meat, we've made it. End of Twerk is kind of the show's best episode. End of Twerk is kind of the show's best episode, and I really don't mean that. But I really don't. But I watched it on Christmas Day, and I truly think it's Glee at some of its best. Self-aware of how stupid it is, but smart and willing to engage in some great social commentary and honour the show's realistically progressive politics, which I do think is the show's downfall in many ways, but here, it's done right. So let's dive in. After Blaine is caught twerking mad the rest of the Glee Club, Mr. Shu uses that as inspiration for this week's episode. Twerking. It's framed to push the Glee Club out of their comfort zone and do something provocative. Sue catches wind, and on an episode of Sue's Corner, which again, when this show does its social commentary right, it is so astute, because Sue Sylvester is meant to be this height of, satire, but she would fit right in a post-Trump, post-truth media landscape. Remember, she's principal now, bans twerking and wants that to become a national policy. This triggers Will to perform Blurred Lines by Robin Thicke. A choice, but we'll get into that. He's then fired, which, I mean, fairs. But then what's also adding fuel to the fire is that Unique, who's a trans character, and it's actually, I think, the first time that a show properly tackled, like, a teenager transitioning. She uses the girls' bathroom, but when that triggers a gender riot, which is so 2021 coded, she results to using the boys' bathroom where she is assaulted, which leads to, definitely in the later half of the show, one of its best solos of If I Were a Boy. Some of the best use of music in the entire show. Sue, being Sue, offers Unique gender-neutral toilet available for her to use at McKinley. She's been drilled into the floor of the choir. After Will attempts to give Unique access to the staff toilet, Sue offers him a proposal. Ban twerking, and she'll give Unique access to the staff toilet. Will struggles with the decision, but eventually concedes, calling for the end of twerk. And this episode is very loaded, and whether it's intentional or unintentional leaves a lot to be desired. But I think the episode and the disdain for it taps into themes of censorship, what it means for something to be provocative as opposed to just freedom and liberation. And it speaks a lot to how black art is often digested, but held to a certain level of disdain in the popular consciousness, and again, by white people. Twerking, a rhythmic dance categorized by the vigorous movement of the hip and lower back, has roots deeply embedded in African and Afro-Caribbean traditions. The term twerk is believed to have originated from the New Orleans bounce scene in the early 1990s. However, the dance can be traced much further back, drawing inspiration from various African dance moves that emphasize the movements of the hips and the ass. Over the years, twerking has evolved within the context of hip-hop and rap music, becoming something associated with certain black genres and artists. But in the same vein, it's become attributed to sex and vulgarity, and this is due to the closeness of twerking to actual sexual intercourse. This generates a lot of unease, particularly in how it objectifies women, who are the main twerkers. But I think the moral panic caused by twerking is fascinating. I would say that my view on human sexuality is very Foucauldian. I'm gonna butcher his name. Michel Foucault's analysis. He argues that discourse, the way that we speak, write, and think about sexuality, is deeply entwined with power dynamics. He argues against the notion that sexuality is inherently fixed or natural. Instead, he believes that sexuality is a historically contingent construct. Also, I always feel a bit weird because I don't really know, like, when I'm doing videos, so I'm obviously reading of something, and I don't think this is going to have, like, visuals over it. So, like, in fact, this is some good food. Enjoy the ride. Sexuality is a historical contingent construct that's shaped by discourses, institutions, and power relations. He puts in the concept of the repressive hypothesis, suggesting that whilst overt expressions of sexuality might be okay today, the underlying mechanisms of control and sexual regulation still exist. And I think that's true. If we look at twerking and just in general movement of the arse, have a lot of ties with black liberation and how historically black people and black bodies have been able to find autonomy and agency over their body. There's this great journal article from academic Elizabeth Perez, The Ontology of Twerk from Sexy Black Movement Style to Afro-Diasporic Sacred Dance, which was written at the time that twerking really became sensationalized and lambasted in America and the West, when Miley Cyrus appropriated blackness as part of her fixation with being America's bad girl. But the cultural, that's interesting. That's really interesting. I've just got an independent thought from the script. Maybe one day I'll do a video essay on Rihanna when she bloody drops an album. That's why I think Rihanna's existence in the West as, to me, the new queen of pop is really fascinating, but we'll save that for another day. And I've got some videos on it. But the cultural roots of dancing, which is now coded as sensual expression, was a vital act of freedom at a time where colonizers banned dance. Can't really deep the full atrocities of it, but being told how you should move your body and express your body is something that I don't even think we can comprehend. I mean, we sort of can, because there's definitely there's that repressive hypothesis, but what black people were dealing with was beyond Foucault's idea of a repressive hypothesis. It was just fucking evil. And how movements which resemble twerking now in the West were developed. They were developed as part of a culture under siege and in the darkness. Malapé, an Afro-Latino dance, which is very similar to twerking, at night after the long days of work. The movement of the waist and the arse reflected the movements made by fish when they are being captured as prey. What seems hedonist now was the only time that pleasure could be felt internally and within community, in the dark, by the sea. I want you to do a bit of independent thinking. Think about black people and water and why that's potent. And that feeling of liberation and individual and collective pleasure has rippled into what has become twerking. Twerking and bounce music are intrinsically tied together, and it's something that began in New Orleans. DJ Jubilee is a bounce house pioneer who emerged in the late 80s and early 90s. He's actually the first artist to use the word twerk in a song. And if you go back and watch a lot of his music videos and people dancing to bounce, men were throwing it back too. And whereas today, because of the fear that the West has imbued and polluted the act with, which I don't think we can sit here and say is unintentional, twerking has been reduced, or can be reduced, to merely a symbol or gesture of male arousal and not really a true expression of freedom and liberation in the body. In a 2013 article called Bouncing Back, the Street Kings and Queens of New Orleans, writer Pooja Patel writes, "Seeing a 4-year-old twerking isn't an uncommon thing in New Orleans," says producer and DJ Rusty Laser. "It's remarkable how outsiders have treated twerk," Laser says. "These kids grow up in a community where it's common and there's no innuendo. It's acrobatics, it's expression, it's a part of music culture. Outsiders sexualize the dance more than it was ever intended to be. People see a female ass move and think it's only good for one thing, provoking or providing sex." I think the controversy, and here he's referring to Miley Cyrus and all the shitstorm she caused, I think the controversy speaks to the level of sexual maturity in pop, that they don't see the world or movement as a complex tapestry. It's an oversimplification that comes from what it takes to be in that realm, and it's easy to simplify these historical complex cultures into digestible nuggets. For bounce, for twerking, that nugget is sex. This is so prevalent when we discuss twerking and when we discuss this episode, End of Twerk, because there's this real moral disgust level at twerking when it's discussed on a public view, which still happens to this day in discourse around twerking in black music. But it's important, as in 2013 when this article was written and when this episode came out, twerking becomes this sensationalized global trend because of Miley Cyrus. It's even offensive to say that, to give her that. But it really highlights how a white woman, and I've talked about that on this page, a lot of the times in this video, I'm just going to put further reading and it's just going to be my videos. That kind of eats. It's just another white woman appropriating something that has a lot of cultural nuance merely for it to be a sign of rebellion, for her. Personal rebellion. And I can give sympathy to Miley Cyrus or white women who are often victim to their own societal ills and societal pressures. But reducing another culture cannot always be the solution, and that seems to be the trend. Again, I'm going to put the Madonna. But it's an example of how twerking is always held to some level of contempt. It's inappropriate and it's over-sexualized. And the big thing, which Miley was trying to really transgress away from, is it's not right for the kids. And what I really want to invite you to do with this video essay is what imbues an act like twerking with sexuality. Also, what genders an act like twerking. And I don't want to play dumb and act like the lines between twerking and sexuality aren't blurred, but this reductive thinking co-opts a lot of rhetoric that contributes to material harm. And let me walk you through it, because this type of thinking about twerking can be applied to so many other things, and it is applied to so many other things. That's why I bring up Foucault. A woman who has her tit out to breastfeed shouldn't be an issue. A child or a teenager in a bikini shouldn't be an issue for adults. But in the same vein, and I'm happy to be taken up on this and explain why, in an ideal reality, women and children, particularly young girls, shouldn't be made to feel conscious about their appearance or how much or how little of their body parts they are illustrating. And I understand that the reality we live in doesn't reflect that, and it's not my lived experience, but there is a system of anarchy, I guess, that is created due to the maintained existence of misogyny. But what I think co-opts a lot of this is this idea, again, that sexuality is inherently fixed, it's biological, and that's something that Foucault disagrees with, and it's something that I disagree with. We are taught through discourse and dogma that sexuality is carnal. There is something about it that we just can't control, and this rhetoric goes hand in hand with rhetoric like boys will be boys. It justifies the existence of a lot of shit male behaviour. You often hear ideas like men are just like visual creatures, we're like a bit primal, we think whatever. And if you've grown up in a Christian environment and you understand the way purity culture works, often a lot of all of the blame is shifted on women. You see it in the way scripture is taken out of context. I think it's the bit talking about how women should wear head coverings, how that's taken out of context, and it shifts a bunch of blame on women in suggesting that they need to be conscious of how they could inadvertently trigger arousal which is uncontrollable, and that is stupid. And you see in a lot of like the conversation with AI, and I saw this interesting tweet about this, like AI that is being used to like alter images of women to be more modest, but then at the same time you have AI being used to make make violent images of women. And often women are left at crossroad because it's like, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. And it doesn't have to be this way, which is why I say we've got to unlearn this idea that sexuality is necessarily fixed or inherent, because what that can do is justify a man being, or anyone being, aroused by anything. You should not, and you don't get aroused by everything that you see. If we leave it up to that, anything can be arousal. And I think if we're told to take a little bit more ownership over our sexuality, a lot of social ills, I'm not going to say they wouldn't exist, because that's not realistic, and I feel like I can't say that. But I think that's what sexual discipline is. Like, you can control your arousal. Again, it's blurred, but like, you should be in full control of your sexuality and your sensuality. And that means you should have the power to turn it on and turn it off. Patriarchy teaches men that it's not like that. It's like this uncontrollable monster that kind of takes over you. Let's do away with that. And I think the moral panic created by certain things, such as twerking, does come from like a legitimate concern about children's safety and sexualization of children and of minors. But it's more of an indictment of how we're able to accept predators and genuine mental illness in society. Because as history shows us, it genuinely doesn't matter. A child or woman could have, their belly out, their legs out, or they could not. Like, that is... mental illness is mental illness. And I understand the desire to safeguard the children, but we've also got to think about how sexuality is socially constructed, and it's constructed in a way that can allow for the continued maintenance and existence of misogyny and the patriarchy. And who often suffers the most? Marginalized groups, particularly black women who were sexualized at the very roots of bounce music. Not at the very roots, but at the origin. A lot of bounce music objectifies women. DJ Jimmy, that's it, Where They At? In that album, there's like a dialogue between men and women, and women, sad, because the track's called Bitches Reply. And that's why female rap is important, and female rap is where the true cultural zeitgeists are. Often they have to reclaim twerking and shaking ass as a clapback, and also a reaffirmation of bodily autonomy. And I feel like I do this a lot because there's so much to say on everything. I'm going to follow this up with a full video essay that I've been writing. It's about 45% done, all about church girls. So I'm going to come back to this thread. But even when you watch this Glee episode, there's nothing in it. Well, Glee has plenty moments where it is indicating this is sexually suggestive. What I like about this episode is it takes away from the sexualized nature of twerking, as the boys are shaking us too. And that's something really interesting when you look at the inception of Bounce. I think I've said this already. Men were throwing it back too, as it wasn't viewed as an inherently sexual act. And it's interesting, as I am a child of the diaspora, in African countries, men shaking nyash or waist is not that frowned upon. Just play dun 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 dun. The Congolese, they don't play, really, and it's not just in the West, but colonialism as a whole has gone and stolen everyone's fun, as it always does. But on this point particularly, the specific policing of black men, which makes them unsigma back, and leading to their misogyny, which is why male bounce or male hip-hop or just anything in that lane has become a lot more predatory and voyeuristic in nature. And I think it's so interesting, and this discourse is gonna be pretty like specifically black British, but like listen, when you're at a motive and it's bashment time, it doesn't give what it needs to give. And I think it's because of the state of like misogynistic anarchy that we live under, but it's also about how it's imbued with this like inherent sexuality to it. There is something sensual about dancing with somebody in that way, purely in the context of that moment. And I think that's why a lot of times you just see girls winding with other girls, because it, like that, there's so much to say. There's so much to say. If you want to sound off on that in the comment section, I'll reply, and I'll maybe use shorts, but I don't really like YouTube shorts, but whatever. And that's why I think this episode does do a lot right in its use of twerking. And I wouldn't give them too many flowers, as it's not that invested in taking a clear cultural narrative in twerking as a black art form, but it doesn't really center the conversation around Miley Cyrus. And even though the episode gets it completely wrong,
twerking did start in Atlanta in the club scene, but it is global now.
But there is enough there, and I think I'm being quite generous with the script, to be honest, but there's enough there to see how racialization and sexualization often play hand in hand. Do I want to keep that in? Yeah, you get that weird delivery. Yes, we are all aware that Mr. Shu is a terrifying human being and is completely unequipped and unable to act as an appropriate educator to these children, planting drugs, offering alcohol, having sex at work, favoritism, microaggressions.
Unique. You need to tone it down with the whole boob thing.
Making a student his best man, loser. Playing Rocky Horror in the Rocky Horror Show. The fact that he's a Spanish student and doesn't speak or respect the language or culture. Suspending a student for not dressing up in a costume. And the list goes on and on and on. However, twerking isn't on it. And the reason we react to this episode is arguably unjustified. There's no real warrant, it's just the fact that we have been conditioned to buy into this moral panic. And I'm making a real provocative point, but it is to cause discomfort, the fact that a lot of black culture is shamefully reduced due to the cultural hegemony, the standards and the values that we imbue with power. So I'm currently editing, and one thing I also want to emphasize is this is like a TV show. Like, he supplies so much suspension of belief to make Glee a enjoyable watch, but how come it's the only time, or like the real big time, where people's suspension of disbelief is suspended or dispended, whatever, is the episode about twerking. That's part of the provocation. How the cultural hegemony, or which can be representative of white men, they are actively trying to erase marginalized cultures who have emerged as directly oppositional to the very things that they're trying to uphold. And overall, I feel like Mr. Shu's fight for freedom of speech has some serious flaws to it. Toxic, and even the episode prior to this, he forces Marley to dress up in an outfit that she's not comfortable to. That's why I don't like season 2. Again, it's indicative of the show as a commercial product, not a TV show. The storytelling is a lot loose. It's a lot more weirdly character focused in certain areas, but in other parts, the characterization is all over the place. And I think that's the overall tussle of writing a show like Glee. How do you serve the commercial interest of the show, but then how do you also serve the narrative, plot, and the characters? And the balance is just off throughout the whole show, and that's fair enough. Whereas here, I feel like this is one of the only times Mr. Schu's moral decision making isn't completely undercut by his weird characterization, and it's evident with how the A plot of the episode works with the B plot of the episode, Unique and the McKinley Gender Riot of 2013, which is such precise commentary on how we sensationalize gender matters. I think one thing that Glee can do very, very, very well, and I don't know how intentional it is, it's able to have the realist, dark comedy elements to it, whilst maintaining the optimism and hope at the heart of the show. And that's why I think fans of Glee have varying relationships with all of the characters on the show, because they are all pieces of shit. And I think it's slightly more nuanced than that, because I think a lot of it you can read between the lines. Santana is a nasty bitch for a very fair reason, whereas Finn is just a bit more like, And I think that's part of what the show's about. It's about embracing diversity, it's about embracing what it means to be human. And it's liberating to see trans narratives like this. And it goes back to what I was saying about Ryan Murphy and queer fantasy. Yes, Unique exists in a hostile environment to trans individuals. However, there is a room and a safe place that she at least has where the world can be expansive and it can feel loving and affirming.
Because you're all minorities.
And you see it in both how the Glee Club is willing to take up for her, but how they're also willing to embrace twerking. Like I said, the boys are throwing it back too. And it's perhaps a sign of where Glee is the most potent and important in what it represents of how safe spaces can look and how all different types of people can exist in the same space. But again, it does kind of become a bit more complex if you look at the show as a whole, because some things it does really well, other things, But in fact, I'm going to say this. Season 5A really is like season 1 of Glee, because when the emotional beats of a singular story work well, my God, do they really. And why it works here is because unintentionally, it's participating in a cultural conversation about blackness. And it's not something that, again, like the episode is truly, really trying to understand, but it's something that it can at least try to embrace and not really, it can embrace it and show what it means to actually fight for an identity or an experience that's not really your own. And it's interesting because I'm going to walk back and explain the impact of this episode as we come towards the end. But Glee, like the rest of popular music, is pretty contingent on black music. I think it's really interesting that obviously the show gets a bit more show tunesy and, you know, top 40 focused. I think it's so interesting that particularly the first few episodes of Glee is predominantly black music. But the way Glee contends with the reality of understanding that, again, like,
Mercedes is black, I'm gay, we make culture.
And the way it contends with this fact is really quite interesting. I think there have been some attempts in trying to explore this. Things like the Troubletones, where even there it doesn't really address, I think, what the core crux of the issue kind of looking at it is. I said earlier, there's really no long-term ramifications on Mr. Schu and how he operates as an individual, whatever. And the same thing can be said for the Spanish teacher episode. But even when you look at season 6 and when Blaine and Karofsky get together, sometimes the show and how it presents, I guess, social injustice, sometimes it kind of contradicts itself or undercuts what it does by having to make choices that are just honestly just like choices that they have to make. I mean, who could they bring back without having to establish a new character? They could have brought back Sebastian from the Warblers, but, you know, Grant Gustin was on The Flash, so let's just pick Karofsky. I mean, and that's why it's fascinating to talk about this stuff, because Glee on a cultural phenomenon operates on so many different levels. I'm having the time of my life. Having the time of my life here. And I mean, social injustice isn't necessarily directly addressed in this episode, but the simplicity of it. And I think if you watch the What You've Really Missed Glee podcast and you hear about Ryan Murphy talk about the show, the reason why I think people really like season 1, or season 1 is kind of untouchable in a sense, and it's really beloved by the cast and the creators, because it really is able to be simple and effective. And due to the simplicity, things can be put quite plainly. And I think that happens a lot with season 5A. Whereas, for example, in season 2, some of the decision making that Mr. Schu makes, And I also think by season 5A, there's been a huge distance in Mr. Schue's presence on the show. Season 4, he's not really around. So I think coming into season 5, he's kind of a shell of his former self. I mean, in some sense, it's like bad to say that a character's a shell of their former self, but the kind of PR that Mr. Schue gets when you watch the whole show and you think, you're just a bit of a fucking nonce. The break was needed. The distance was needed. And I mean, people still think he's a nonce. People look at this episode and say that it's just a bit weird. Why is this man twerking with children and da-da-da-da-da? But if you simplify the moral dilemmas, let's do, for example, the Rocky Horror Picture Show. Mr. Schue's whole motive is trying to get with Emma, who I hate, but I hate Emma Pillsbury. His whole motivation there is to prove to another member of staff that he loves her, whatever. Or let's do another episode. Okay, I brought up the Spanish teacher. He's being motivated by pride and his whiteness, I guess. But let's talk about the moral dilemma of the episode. Defend music and cultural preservation of an art form, which is one that belongs to the marginalized, or defend the material preservation of a black marginalized student. This is some Emmy level type shit that was only really reserved for Kurt Hummel's character, and even to him, Mr. Schue was a bit of an asshole.
Kurt, gonna say it again. Boys team.
And it's this type of writing that is really what makes Glee special. And before it became this huge cultural phenomenon, it's like a Wills or in Impedes, where you see him try to empower Tina. And again, the show kind of lost its way there, but whatever. And in how Glee doesn't always honour the politic of the show, we can see that this episode is the show at its most consistent. I'm going to compare it with 2 other episodes. The show has had conversations about sex before, and I'm going to look particularly at season 2, 15, Sexy, which is really bizarre because yes, Holly Holiday has a point that sex education is really important, but she didn't need to perform Gary Glitter or Paul, whatever his name is, the nonce, or singing Prince to make that point known, because the episode loses itself in a conversation about, you know, sex appeal and making sex tapes and like stuff that serves well for the like comedic plot of the episode. Again, this back and forth between Emma and Will and whatever. In terms of what the show's about and the fact that there's minors, no. And then let's look at Throwdown season 1, episode 7, where there's a conversation about race and how marginalized students may feel. But even there, it's merely used as a plot device and for the humor of it. And I acknowledge that the episode's main focus is on the relationship between Sue and Will, but it is also making a really good point without much impact or follow through. End of Twerk, unlike these other episodes, is actually Glee standing on business on what it's about. 5 in some sense isn't really much of a rebirth of the show, but it definitely is a back to basics approach. And I mean, again, this episode is just filler, but it's simple and meaningful in its social commentary. We really do kick up a fuss about twerking, and even this episode, people kick up a whole fuss about it. It's not due to the content, it's due to how we don't interpret culture, and we don't interpret things with any sense of nuance. And it's really through me and my like pursuit of understanding like black culture and black music. I look back on this now and I'm just like, can we see how white people make this entire conversation kind of about themselves, and it completely distracts from what's really going on, and that's the stripping and the taking away of black culture. And Glee, in this episode, has found itself on the right side of history. And what makes it even more important is an episode like Throwback had no long-term stakes and consequences. End of Twerk does. This episode is so important for what ends up happening in season 6 with episode 7, Transitioning. We're tackling so forefront. And I mean, I kind of don't think Coach Beast transitioning was a great choice representation wise, yes, but I think it kind of undercuts what Coach Beast is meant to represent, that femininity isn't a monolith, and you can be feminine but you can still own the things I like. But that's just me. Out End of Twerk, where Mr. Schue really does stand up and advocate for unique beyond her sitting in the choir room. Because of that, it adds a lot of meaning to when he does choose to leave Vocal Adrenaline and the work he does to just make Beast feel safe. Goes beyond just a plot point to get Mr. Schue back in McKinley. it represents what Mr. Shu is really, really meant to be about. But that's why if you're able to see Glee as a TV show first, which is kind of difficult, you can really appreciate the quieter character moments. Because even when it's at its arguably worst, it was tempting to be a zeitgeist and engaging imperfectly in some sense, but engaging in social commentary and representational advocacy. And I mean, this episode isn't perfect. The whole show isn't perfect. Fuck what they did to Charlie. I said I was going to rant about it. I don't think I care that much. What they did to Jake and Marley was really, really fucking weird. Fuck Blake Jenner. I think they destroyed so much of the goodwill that they had built with Jake's storyline, and just to kind of have him go be a cheater for literally no other reason. It just felt, no. But the reason this episode isn't perfect isn't because Mr. Shu sang blurred lines and because the kids were twerking. And it's a bit sad that the takeaway of the episode was, you know, we shouldn't be rebelling and let's be authentic, because I think it is a bit similar to how white artists just kind of like take it. They'll be like, oh, well, let me go back to being authentic. Miley Cyrus. I'm not going to say Ariana Grande, but there will be a video essay about like that. But that's not what I'm saying about Ariana Grande, but it's what I could say about Ariana Grande, but it's not what I'm saying about Ariana Grande. There will be a new video soon. But also in that, I feel like a lot of it is to soften the blow that actually Mr. Shu did have to make this decision. But again, it's also an act that's been primarily done for the well-being of a student. It's something we rarely see Mr. Shu actually legitimately care about. So, I mean, yeah, give it up for Glee. Oh my God, I'm done. This video is done. Thank you guys so much for watching. Like, subscribe. I'll be back. I'll be here soon. No, let me say something interesting. Pause. What should I say that's kind of like a good way to end the video? Follow me on TikTok, Instagram. I think my next video is gonna be about Doctor Who. I kind of want to do a response and talk about the 60th anniversary. What have I soft launched in this video? I soft launch Doctor Who. I soft launched my Renaissance Church Girl video. I've got my Ariana one. Those are the ones on my plate right now. Okay. Bye, y'all. Oh.